What do you think about hormone replacement therapy? Do you have an actual opinion on if it decreases performance enough to make it fair? And do you ultimately think trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports? What's your actual opinion on that?
If you look up Fallon Fox, you're going to see a lot of articles mentioning how she fractured another woman's skull. Unfortunately, trans athletes have been politicized, and this has become a political agenda, and we've become a tool to help further a certain narrative and to motivate voters.
Honestly, if someone came in and just crushed me.
No one denies the effect that PEDs and anabolic steroids have on an athlete's performance, but it seems like no one wants to acknowledge the effect that removing all those androgens and replacing them with estrogens has on a person. And it has a significant effect as well in the opposite direction. Any girl who doesn't fit these stereotypically feminine ideals is going to have her gender questioned. Who's probably going to be harmed by this the most is women.
150.19, a new world record.
Why don't you go on the website?
Hey everyone, just wanted to give you a quick apology on this episode. We had some technical difficulties for the first 3.5 minutes with the audio. This is my first time editing the entire video. Olivia's been handling those responsibilities so far, and despite my best efforts, I can't figure out what went wrong there, but there's a little bit of like a second audio track in the background for the first 3.5 minutes. It's annoying, but you can hear everything we're saying. So if you can make it through that first 3.5 minutes, the rest of the entire podcast is fine, but just kind of wanted to give you that heads up and apologize. You can yell at me or be upset with me, and then hopefully this will never happen again. All right, thanks everyone, and enjoy the episode.
All right, welcome back everybody to the Authenticity Podcast, where we are chasing authentic conversations on meaningful topics. We're here shooting at a Crocs gym in Novi, Michigan, and I'm Olivia Walker, one of the hosts.
I am your other host, Janae Croc.
And today we're going to be talking about transgender athletes in women's sports.
Yeah, so why did we want to do this episode? We think it's very important. It's currently a very hot topic in the world. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and obviously as a lifelong athlete who's also trans, this hits very close to home for me. And also, I think, unfortunately, trans athletes are being used as a political tool to enact countless new laws targeting trans people's access to healthcare and human rights. And that's not only happening here in the United States, but all across the world. And this is such a large, all-encompassing topic with so many facets to it. We're not going to be able to talk about all of those in a single episode. So today's episode is going to focus mostly on trans women competing in women's sports and whether or not that is fair. So that'll be today's focus, and you can let us know in the future if you want us to do more episodes on a lot of the other things that are related to this. In the beginning, we want to acknowledge that we have our own bias, and we're going to try to be as objective as possible and state actual facts versus opinions and try to examine both sides of the argument. But especially for me, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. So of course I'm going to have a strong bias, but we're going to try very hard to be as neutral as we can and look at, all sides of the argument.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's very important to be, to stick with the theme of our entire podcast of being authentic and open and honest, and to look at things from all angles and not just our own.
For sure. So the first question I have lined up for you here, Janae, is have you ever competed against women, and where are your world records held?
Yeah, so that's something that's actually, there's been a lot of misinformation about, right? I've been used in a number of even political ads and by a number of popular social media people. My images, my name, and have been used in claiming that I have competed in women's sports, which I have never done and have no intentions to do. All of my records and all of my world championships and victories in every sport I've competed in have all been in the men's division competing against other males. And for those people who aren't super familiar with my career, I was a world record holder and world champion in powerlifting. I was also a pretty successful bodybuilder, and then I've won 2 world championships in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, competing in the masters division. But yeah, all of those have been done in the men's division. So I have never competed against women, and I have no intentions to do so. So yeah, that's I think that's just important to mention because it's been a lot. If you search on the internet, you're going to find stuff that claims that I have competed against women, and DeSantis and Governor DeSantis in Florida, his political team created an anti-trans women athlete ad that actually used my image in their video. So it's happened. Stephen Crowder, who was a popular right-wing talking head, has also used my name and my images specifically in some of his articles. There's other popular social media people with millions of followers that have used me as an example of a trans woman athlete, and that's a big part of the reason that I never have and never intend to compete against women, is because I know how much harm that would cause the trans community. And I mean, I would be the poster child, right, for banning trans women from everything. And I think it's important to keep in mind, I'm an extreme outlier, right? So I was number 1 in the world in its strength sport as a male. And then, so looking at me is I'm that example that's all the way out to one end of the argument, right?
For sure.
And then me being super muscular and, having done all these things, obviously that a lot of people would feel that me competing, against, in women's sports would be, hugely unfair. So there's more reasons than that why I've chosen never to do that. But that's a big part of it.
Okay. So when you were competing as a male, you were taking PEDs, right?
Yes.
So how long were you taking them for, and how did that affect your performance?
Okay. So I was lifetime drug-free for a long time. I was in my mid-30s before I ever used PEDs. And actually it was after I had cancer that kind of pushed me in that direction, because up to that point, I had been competing in for people that don't know, in powerlifting, bodybuilding, and some other of the strength sports, they have divisions that are tested and divisions that aren't. So it's understood. It's not against the rules. I was never cheating. I never competed in organizations that tested, after I started using PEDs. And just to give people an idea, before I ever took anything, I had squatted 900 pounds in competition. I had benched in the mid 500s, and I had deadlifted well over 700 pounds, lifetime drug free.
Right.
And I had already placed in the top 3 at nationals in tested and non-tested organizations, and already qualified for world championships in non-tested organizations as a drug-free athlete. Okay. So I was already a very, very high level athlete. And then I started using PEDs at age 32. And then over the next 4 years after that, was when I won my first world championship. And then it was another 3 years later. So 7 years after I started using PEDs is when I set the all-time world record in my weight class. And then I used PEDs on and off for a period of around 15 to 17 years, something like that. It's kind of, there was a lot of, towards the end of my career, not even towards the end, still quite early into it, transition was weighing on me really heavily. And that's part of the reason, I would stop all the PEDs, because they're androgens. They basically have masculinizing effects as well, which for me was something that I struggled with and, didn't like about it. And even in the ways it benefited me as an athlete, I had very mixed feelings about it. And but I didn't like the things it was doing to my body and in those ways. And so I would stop for months, drop a bunch of weight, begin transition, and then feel like I wasn't ready to stop competing. I still had goals as an athlete I wanted to accomplish, and starting female hormones and stuff had such a drastic effect on my performance. I'd start to lose strength and muscle, and then I'd be like, I don't know if this is worth it. And then I would go back on, and that I did that back and forth for honestly almost the last 10 years of my powerlifting and bodybuilding career. I think the first time I started to attempt transition was 2007. And then I officially stopped competing in strength sports in like 2015. So like 8 years later.
Okay. So you've been taking female hormones now. So
Yes,
how long have you been doing that for, and how have you noticed that affect your performance?
Yeah. So I first started estrogen in 2015, so 10 years ago. So I've been on a decade. I've been on and off female hormones, and then I've been taking them nonstop for 4 years. But I was still like during that in that 4 years. So I've been on estrogen for 4 years, and then progesterone we added in 2 years ago. And but over that 4 years, I was still doing very low doses of mild androgens in an attempt to maintain some of my athletic performance. Because the thing was, I noticed a drastic change in my strength and muscle mass as soon as I stopped the androgens and started estrogens. So it affected me so much as an athlete in me wanting to maintain my performance, obviously, because I'm still competing. Like I've been competing in jiu-jitsu for 5 years now. And then, and just that's a big part of who I am. An athlete's a big part of my identity and always has been. So that's something I've really struggled with because of the performance loss. But yeah, and then so exclusively, I've stopped all androgens and I have no intentions of ever taking them again, any PDEDs ever again. And that was 15 months ago. And so I've been exclusively on estrogen and progesterone for the last 15 months. And the changes have been quite dramatic. And we'll talk more about that, as we go through the episode.
Yeah. Well, did you want to mention like what the major, like I know we were lifting together a couple of weeks ago and our bench was like, Janae was a world champion bencher.
Yeah.
And our bench was like, I like just telling the story because it feels pretty good, but our bench was close to each other. It's like you're still out benching me by like 15 pounds, maybe.
Yeah. In a couple more weeks, and maybe not.
Yeah.
But just so people have an idea of, so at my peak, my best lifts in my prime competing were 1,014 in the squat, 738 in the bench press, and 810 pounds in the deadlift. And then a year ago, so and to be fair, I set that record in 2009, but my strength was still pretty, around that level. And I think my raw bench even went up when I was bodybuilding. There's my best raw. So that was in like using supportive equipment too. But
yeah, can you give that? Because I think not many people would know equipped versus raw.
Yeah. And it's kind of a hard thing too, because people get, so you like powerlifters in some divisions, they call it multiply or equipped divisions. You wear squat suits or bench shirts and deadlift suits, which help you lift more. They're very tight. They're supportive. They protect you in some ways, but they also like add pounds to your lifts. But I was someone that was known as being very strong regardless. And I didn't wear like my squat suit. I could put my straps up by myself. I didn't wear knee wraps. When I squatted 1,014 pounds, I had no knee wraps on, just kind of a loose squat suit. Not that it didn't help, it still helped me, but yeah, I had squatted well over 900 pounds in training and without all that stuff. Right. Trying to think, I might have had maybe briefs on. I remember many times going up over 900 pounds just wearing like briefs, which, had some support. But, and then like bench press, there's video of me doing training alone in my basement with no spotter, no lift off, doing an easy triple with 495 pounds in the bench press.
Right.
I had done sets of 10 in the dumbbell bench press with 185 pound dumbbells, so. Yeah.
And to be fair, this was in your peak when it was your sole focus. You were training really, really hard for that specific goal.
Right.
But even like a year or two ago, you were benching. Yeah.
I was back over. So I had a complete quadriceps tendon rupture a year. I haven't focused on strength training. I always train but my training's been mostly like maintenance and I haven't focused on strength training really in over 10 years.
Yeah.
But I always train. Like I'm always training. And, but so a year and a half ago, I had a complete rupture of my quadriceps tendon and I couldn't do any cardio. I couldn't train jujitsu for a short period of time. And, so I was like, you know what? I haven't really focused on lifting for a while. And that's like the only type of training I can really do right now. So I did for a short period of time and my strength jumped back dramatically. And then I started eating more and because my body weight's fluctuated a lot. Just to give people an idea, when I was focused on bodybuilding, the biggest I ever got was 280 pounds. You know, I was consistently waking up over 270 pounds, and I'm 5'8". Actually, I was probably a little taller then. I've shrunk a little bit as I get older, and I've been on estrogen. So over the last, like, since I've been competing in jiu-jitsu, when I started competing in jiu-jitsu 5 years ago, I was about 245 to 250. And then I did that. I was at that body weight for like a year. Then I dropped down to like 215 and then I've gone back and up. But my weight's fluctuated between probably 210 to 215 and 250 over the last 5 years. And where was I going with that? Oh, like the strength loss.
Just like your size difference too now compared to that.
So currently, I've been dieting now for the last 15 months. And I guess I never finished talking about like how strong I was a year ago. That's where I was going with that. Yeah. So I when I could only do the strength training, I was about 230 pounds when I got injured. I put on 20 pounds of muscle, like boom, like and like I said, up to my calories.
And
were
you still taking androgens at that point too?
I was taking like a TRT type dose of androgens, but I did bump it up a little bit during this period of time. That's the last time. I wouldn't call it like a cycle. Like I didn't, not anything close to what I would do when I was competing. I just said I was taking one substance and I increased the dose on it for a little bit.
And also
for like 4 weeks.
To be clear too, you don't produce androgens naturally. I think that's something to point out.
Yeah. So that's another thing, I guess, important thing to know. I had what's called an orchiectomy, which is a removal of the testes. And so my body doesn't produce any testosterone on its own anymore. There's a small amount from the adrenal glands, like everybody's does, but my testosterone levels now are lower than a typical woman's.
Yeah.
Because the woman makes a small amount from her ovaries, and I don't have those, and I don't have testicles. So like the only amounts I have naturally are a tiny amount from my adrenal glands. So my total testosterone levels, for people that are familiar with those things, and I'm sure some of our listeners are, my blood work over the last year and a half, my test levels have been between like 5 and 12 total. That's not free, that's total. So like a typical male will have between like 300 and 1,000. And most guys, like, in their 20s are going to be like 700, 800 or something. Mine's 5. So like, yeah, very, very low. And, but so anyway, so this short period of time, and it, and without focusing on strength training, my bench was still like in the mid 300s, and throughout like the last decade or so, I've always been able to bench over 400 raw. Like I maintained a 405 plus raw bench for a long time, but just focusing on it for like, maybe 8 weeks, I put on 20 pounds of muscle, like really fast. Bench jumped up back to the from the mid 300s to the mid 400s. I put like 100 pounds on my bench in like 6 weeks or something. And so 15 months ago, I was weighing 250 pounds and bench pressing. I didn't take a true max, so I don't know exactly, but mid 400s raw.
Sure, yeah.
Currently, 15 months later, after stopping all the androgens, being exclusively on estrogen and progesterone, and then also dropping a lot of body weight, I'm currently 185 pounds. When we benched a couple weeks ago, did I miss the second rep on 225?
Yeah, you hit one at 225 and missed the second one.
Yeah. So I'm
not gonna lie, it was a glory day for me.
Ouch. But yeah, so we're talking like my bench press in 15 months has literally decreased in half. Yeah. So from probably 450-ish to 225. Yeah. And the thing is too, like I thought I had kind of bottomed out around the year mark, but it feels like it's still slipping a little bit more slowly now. It's kind of leveled off. But like a couple of weeks before that, I had done 225, I think, for a triple. And
actually, because the last time I was out, we benched as well, and I think I was there for that.
Yeah. And 225 for a single, which for a 185-pound woman, still pretty good. Yeah. But not anything you've
and
done.
And for reference, we're the same weight. I'm 185 typically too, but kind of maybe fluctuate. But yeah. And I have bench 215. I don't focus on strength training much now. I train still. I try to keep it up. But yeah, I can bench. I think when maybe the week before that, I benched 205. I don't know what I could bench as a max if I was really trying or focusing on it, but that's sort of just what my maintenance would be.
Yeah. So I guess it's just interesting to
also
know.
Drug-free, lifetime drug-free. That's important to note as well.
Yeah. So, and you're quite strong. For a lifetime drug-free woman who has done very little, totally focused on strength training. Like you've trained a lot over the years, but you've only focused on strength training for a short period of time, really.
Yeah, for sure.
And but I guess the whole point of that is it's interesting to note how much my performance has dropped off in a little over a year's time.
Yeah.
And I think that's something with trans athletes that everyone completely discounts. Now, again, I think I'm an outlier. You know, I was at an extreme level for strength, regardless of any. I mean, I was literally the strongest person in the world in my weight class in my prime against men. You know? So, yeah, an extreme outlier. But in my performance, I think it's fair to say that every trans girl's performance drops off when they start what's called HRT, hormone replacement therapy, which involves suppressing androgens and replacing it with estrogens. But I've never seen anyone else's, you know, performance decrease as much as mine, but that's probably also due to probably two things: the extreme levels I was at, and then also my PED use. But yeah, so it's really, I think that's one of the big problems with this whole discussion is people are focused on, you know, you hear constantly, and because this is a politically charged thing, biological male competing against women. There's a big difference between a trans woman and a biological male or somebody pre-transition. No one denies the effect that PEDs and anabolic steroids have on an athlete's performance, but it seems like no one wants to acknowledge the effect that removing all those androgens and replacing them with estrogens has on a person. And it has a significant effect as well in the opposite direction. So I think that's part of the discussion that's important to mention and that a lot of people aren't talking about. Because, yeah, if you look at, you know, a lot of sports, especially sports where speed or strength are, you know, the primary attributes that contribute to success, there's a big gap between the best men and the best women. Now, endurance sports, that gap narrows a lot. And in ultra endurance sports, women are actually just as good as men. It's like the only area where, in like, I believe still in long distance swimming, a woman holds the all-time world record. But yeah, so in, you know, sports that are more strength or speed based, that's where the gap widens. Right. And so
like all that being said, then is there, like, would you ever consider competing against women farther along in your transition?
No, I have no intentions of doing that ever. Although I will say, like, it'll be interesting to see. Currently, I still don't think it would be fair for me to do so. And I definitely didn't think that was fair early on. But yeah, it'd be interesting to circle back to this a few years from now and see where my body's at, where my strength and speed levels are at. And if then I still have no plans to do that. But if I would feel that it would be fair at that point, if my performance had decreased enough where like I get to a point where I feel like I no longer have an advantage. So I can't answer right now as far as in the future would I feel it's fair. I still, you know, say that I have zero intentions to ever do that. Right. But it's different too. Like, let's say 3 years from now, I wanted to run a marathon. Do I think I have an unfair advantage in that? No, I'm not. Like, all the things I did would actually make it harder for me to run a good marathon. Right. And so going up against good female marathoners, I'm sure I'd get my butt kicked. And, but yeah, in a strength sport, that might be a different thing. Yeah.
It's a complicated,
it's
a complicated topic, right?
As we'll talk more about, there's a lot of aspects to this and a lot of different scenarios where I think it changes things.
For sure.
Yeah. So talking about you know, we talk about like how I feel about myself competing and, you know, and never planning. I've never done that and have no intentions to. But you, as an accomplished female athlete yourself, like you held a world record in fire fit, you were Canadian national champion. How would you feel if a trans woman entered the same competition as you and beat you? And then conversely, how would you feel if she entered but placed at the bottom of the pack? Like, would that affect you differently? So yeah, what are your feelings on that?
Yeah, like, honestly, if someone came in and just crushed me, I would have a hard time with it. I would.
Understandably so. Yeah.
I think it really depends on the person too, right? Because like, are they just coming in from the men's category and like, you know, the next year they're coming into the women's and just like crushing it? Or are they new to the sport and they come in and they just crush it? Or have they been working for years and they work up to beat me? Because I think that's a very different thing too, right? Like, I think, if you've earned it over the years and it's not just like an obvious thing and it's obviously due to work instead of an apparent my God, what's the word?
Yeah, genetic advantage. Yeah.
Then that's different. But yeah, I definitely feel it's definitely hard to say. I think the other thing for me is like my example of a trans woman that I know is you, right? And like,
which again, I'm
it's
the
hard.
extreme
Yeah, because
outlier,
like
right?
to me, I'm like I've watched Janae crush me over the years and like everything, and I've found it really frustrating in a lot of ways, and just and been like so to see. I think if you came in and beat me, which to be fair could be expected. You were a world-class athlete in a lot of things. You should be a good athlete in other areas.
Well, yeah, if I was
right?
number one in the world as a male, you would expect that, let's say I had been born female, that I would have had similar level success.
Yeah.
I could have been maybe the top female strength athlete.
Sure, yeah, totally. But it would be hard for me not to still be like, feel slighted by that in a way. And like, but then, it's like I look at some other, like we were looking at some videos of different trans women that are athletes before this. And I'm like, there's some that, you would never, and again, I hate to make this about like looks, but like you'd never be able to tell the difference, like in terms of their body looking at them or whatever. So you don't, or you just look at them and you completely see equality in that way. So you don't come at it from feeling like
they have a physique and a body that it looks like like if they were on a team, they would not stand out at all.
Right. And it's like, so it feels like to me, I look at that, I'm like, no, like that's, if you are looking like we're on the same playing field, then fine. But like if I see someone like you that's looking super jacked, or, I think with the sport I did, Fire Fit, somebody comes in and if they're, super tall and super, that I find that a little bit hard because I'm like, in my head, I'm just like, well, if I was born male and I transitioned to female, what would I be like? Would I be like 6'5"? Maybe, I don't know, maybe not. But I think it's hard not to go there.
Height difference like 6 inches, so
something like that. Yeah, I'm like
5'9",
Yeah, 5'9"-ish, 5'10" maybe.
Yeah,
in
so
and around there.
6'3", 6'4",
potentially, right? So I think it's hard not to go there in your head of like this, and then like speaking of all those things, it's hard not to think about like I'm somebody that gets really aggressive, painful periods. I'm like, it's hard not to think about how, I'm out of commission or like really have to struggle through that training, a bit like in the month. But I think that all comes into your head more when you're seeing someone walk in and still, maintain a lot of their same characteristics from when they were male. And the other thing I think for me that's hard is like I have been in a male-dominated profession, sport, all those things my entire life.
So you're very aware of a lot of these differences, and like how you've expressed to me before, like how like with Fire Fit or even some things on the job, you work very, very hard, and then you just have some random guy come in and his performance levels are similar to yours, and he hasn't put in anywhere near the work you
so have. I've experienced that. I've experienced even just on the trucks at work. Like there's guys that don't work out at all that have a base level of strength that's comparable to mine just because they're men, right? And again, I'm not saying trans women are men, but I think that when you visualize this, like as somebody that's when you ask it like, oh, how'd you feel if they came in and beat you? Like I visualize somebody that still has those characteristics, right? That are giving them that advantage. And I think that's typical of what maybe people that don't understand what you're saying about the hormones feel too, right? And that's why I think it's important to talk about this side of it, because I think it's a common opinion that I think is not. I feel like people aren't allowed to talk about that or say that in the media, right? And it's like, but they're thinking it, and they're people like me who I care about trans people and I care about equality and whatever, but like it's hard to get past certain things like that. So I think it's important to acknowledge those opinions that are out there and not like, chastise people for sharing that, because I think there are valid points on both sides. And again.
Well, and I think those images come to mind because that's what you see, right?
Yeah,
that's what we see on social media.
Exactly.
That's what we see in the news. So currently there's, they're banning trans athletes in the NCAA.
Mm-hmm.
They just got banned from the Olympics after being allowed to compete since 2004. Right. All these new rules are coming into effect, and basically across the board and across the world, trans women athletes are being banned from the majority of sports.
Right.
And, a lot that's had to contribute to that is, every time someone has any amount of success, that's magnified and often exaggerated.
Yeah, exactly.
And the images we see, like I said, like my image has been used to promote this agenda, and I'm someone who's
completely
never competed against women.
Yeah.
And then the girls right now, as far as we know, there are out of over 530,000, roughly 530,000 athletes, over 500,000 athletes in the NCAA in the United States. Mm-hmm. There's 10 of them that we know of that are trans.
Right.
But we don't know who any of them are.
Yeah.
You know why? because they're not having a lot of success. And
They probably blend in too,
well,
right?
that's the thing. They don't
Yeah.
fit the agenda, right? They don't like, I can assume that these girls blend in, so they don't make a striking image, and they're not going to help like with that narrative of see how unfair this is.
Yeah, because
otherwise I'm sure we would know exactly who they are and how they're doing.
Yeah, so like, and literally, like, it's like when you see that, like, we looked up this video. It was a female professional rugby player, I think, and immediately in my head, I'm like, well, that seems a little not fair. And then we look her up. I'm like, I'd totally play with her. She, and I think people aren't showing
doesn't
that
fit the
image
narrative,
because she
right.
doesn't fit a narrative that makes you, think it's unfair. So it is an interesting thing to talk about. And there's so many stories in the media that are like that, right? And I know you have a lot of them. You've done a lot of research on this, and you have a lot of things that you can share with people to sort of help them see like what the truth of those stories are. So do you want to go into talking about that?
This is part of just like trying to be honest and present the truth here. So obviously we've already talked about all things that have happened with me, but a perfect example is not too long ago, President Trump gave an example of this trans woman who had won what's called a bike packing event. And it's like an ultra endurance event where it's many, many miles. You ride a bike through a lot of it. And then at points you have to carry your bike, and a woman broke the record.
Right.
Well, this was President Trump portrayed this as a trans woman smashing records against women and breaking a women's record. The reality is that these events are not gendered. So this event that she won, the previous record holder was a male, and both men and women compete against each other because in ultra endurance events, women do very well.
Right.
And then this in that sport, the record has been traded back and forth between men and women. So this was a perfect example of a very inaccurate, like a very misleading way to present this. Yes, this woman did win it. She did break a record. It's since been broken again, I think by a male, but other women have held the record too. So this is a sport where there's not an advantage. She wasn't competing exclusively against women, but this is the kind of stuff that happens, right? And it makes for good headlines.
For sure.
I'll talk about a couple of the athletes that probably most people have heard of. So Fallon Fox was an MMA fighter, and she was one of the first trans athletes to really start getting talked a lot about, and probably because of the sport too, because it's MMA, so it's fighting. And her results were greatly exaggerated. And here's a perfect example. So if you look up Fallon Fox, you're going to see a lot of articles mentioning how she fractured another woman's skull and how horrible this is. If you look into it more, what actually happened was an orbital fracture, and that's the bone that surrounds the eye. This is a very common injury in MMA. Other women have suffered the same injury. But if you read the articles about her, it makes it sound like she broke some woman's head in half.
Right.
And so again, where there's some truth to things, but it's greatly exaggerated to make things look far worse than what they are.
Right.
And like her record, she was 5-1. Like she had to quit fighting because of death threats and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And but her results and her performance was greatly exaggerated. She was 5-1 as a pro, but if you look deeper into it, 2 of those victories were against women who had never won a fight. I think the combined record of the people she fought was something like 8-24 or something like that.
So she wasn't fighting like the best people.
No, she fought one woman who fought in the UFC, and that's who she lost to. She got TKO'd by.
Okay.
So just again, it was everything was
you never
twisted
hear
and
about that.
exaggerated. Yeah, and then Laurel Hubbard is the Olympic weightlifter from New Zealand. That a lot of if you had watched social media when that Olympics came about, people were talking, oh, she's going to smash all the records and this and that. That's not the reality. She ended up like what we call in strength sports bombing out. She didn't get any of her. So Olympic lifting is 2 lifts, the snatch and the clean and jerk. She didn't get any of her lifts passed for her snatch. And so she was out of the competition, didn't medal, didn't place, basically didn't, they say DNP, did not place.
Right.
But the best she had ever done competing against the best women in the world, and this was her best competition, the heaviest weight she ever lifted, she placed 6th at the World Championships. So still pretty good, but she wasn't even, they had asked, I remember I saw an article, they were asking a lot of the other coaches about how they felt about Laurel competing at these world championships and stuff. And I believe it was one of the US coaches they interviewed, and he's like, it's a non-issue. And then like, what do you mean? Well, he's like, she'll be lucky to place in the top 10. Like she's not anywhere close to the best girls.
Yeah.
And then she ended up having her best meet ever and placed 6th. But that's the thing. She was like over 100 pounds behind the winner, which in Olympic lifting is huge. huge. So yeah, she was never a threat to medal. She was never, her performance was never as good as people made it out to be. And so again, just more exaggeration. Yeah, and that's really common. And I could sit here and give you examples of girls all day, like that we could talk about that the same things happened with. It's just, like I said, when unfortunately trans athletes have been politicized and this has become a political agenda and we become a tool to help further a certain narrative and to motivate voters and things like that. So you're not going to get an accurate view. And so I just encourage anyone out there, when you see stuff like this, do a little research. Take 5 minutes to Google it and look a little deeper into it. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that what you're seeing is not accurate. It's exaggerated, or maybe even completely a lie.
Right.
But yeah, that's super common.
Okay. Well, so basically then, what do you think about hormone replacement therapy? Do you have an actual opinion on if it decreases performance enough to make it fair? And do you ultimately think women should be allowed, or trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports? What's your actual opinion on that?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of things in life, it's very nuanced. I don't think there's a simple answer. And I think depending on the scenario and the person, that answer for me, my opinion changes a lot. I think we need to talk about, pre-puberty versus post-puberty.
Right.
So if we're talking about young children, I don't see any reason for sports to even be gendered before puberty. That's when the boy's testosterone kicks in. That's when that athletic advantage really starts. And so in that scenario, I don't think that there's even a reason for any of the sports to be gendered.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Age of transition makes a huge difference. So for a trans woman who never went through a male puberty, if she started transitioning in her teens, that's hugely different than someone like me who transitioned much later in life. And after for myself, not only having a male puberty, but also being on a supplemental male hormones for many years, that's a completely different scenario than some girl who transitioned in her mid-teens.
For sure.
If you look at a trans girl who transitions young and never went through a male puberty, physically they're indistinguishable from any other woman. They don't get the added muscle mass. Their voice doesn't change. They never get the facial hair. All the athletic benefits that come along with the increase in androgen levels never happens. So in that scenario, I don't see any reason to prevent trans women from competing.
Right.
But that's, like I said, that's very different from someone like me who transitioned much later in life and enjoyed all those advantages for a period of time.
Right.
I think the issue changes a lot if we're talking about recreational versus pro sports. In recreational sports, why shouldn't trans women be able to compete?
For sure.
That's, like if we're just talking about people having fun, co-ed softball or whatever, or even, just like I do know a few trans girls that play like in women's rec leagues for basketball and things like that, and they have no issues whatsoever.
Yeah.
But that's very different versus a pro sport where, you're competing for money or, and the recognition can bring, a great financial success. And obviously women's sports are still that's still a topic that, that there's a huge gap between the top female athletes and top male athletes. That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I think in those realms that's a different argument as well. And so there are some studies too, like there's studies on trans athletes, but the problem is there's not a lot of studies, and the studies that have been done are on very small sample sizes.
Right.
Unfortunately, this is due to there just aren't that many trans athletes, and it's hard to have a study where you follow a large sample size for a long period of time. Now, the studies that are out there largely indicate that there isn't a significant advantage, but some of these studies, one of the main studies were done on middle distance runners, which is a sport that likely, that advantage isn't going to be as great.
Yeah.
So again, the studies we do have largely point to, and there was another one, a Canadian study that was recently done that again came up with the conclusion that there's not a significant advantage. But we need more. And to my knowledge, there haven't been any studies done on strength sports or sports that rely primarily on speed, where you would assume there would be a greater advantage, like sprinting or,
So
shot
do
put.
Do you think those studies would have to be done across a broad range of sports and a broad range of athletes, I guess?
Well, exactly. Like anything else, the larger the sample size, the more diverse the sample size, the more valuable the results.
Okay.
So hopefully in the future we'll get that. But it's going to be, like I said, like in the NCAA, we're talking about 10 athletes, over 500,000. So how do you get, you're not going to have a sample size that's going to have thousands of athletes.
Yeah.
So it's just a very difficult thing to do. And then that's obviously another argument there. Like, why is the world so focused on this very small number of girls that, and I don't mean to completely exclude trans men from this argument,
fair.
because there are trans male athletes.
I think less people have,
and
that arises less issues for people, right?
Yeah, people just assume that they're at a disadvantage, so it's less charged, right? Like, people are less upset about it, and if a trans man does well, a lot less people are going to take issue with that. But not that they haven't had. Mac Beggs, who was a wrestler, he did have a lot of issues competing and stuff. And that's something, so. The problem was, so there was a law enacted, and he was from Texas, and there was a law enacted targeting trans girls. The idea was to keep trans girls from being able to compete in women's sports, but it basically, the rule said, if you can't switch divisions no matter what, don't care if you're on hormones, don't care if you're transitioning.
So they wanted him to compete against the women?
They made him stay in the women's division, and what happened was he was already a good wrestler, so he started transitioning and taking hormones after his sophomore year. And then, and he'd already done quite well as in his first 2 years, but his junior and senior year, especially adding in testosterone, won the state championship in the girls division both times. He was getting booed and harassed, but he had no choice. In USA Wrestling, which allowed trans people to compete, that's outside the school system, he was competing as a male and still doing quite well.
Right.
And then he actually did make a college wrestling team for the men's team, and I actually talked to him personally.
Oh, did you?
And because I hadn't heard anything, and I met him, and we talked, and then he shared with me like that he had quit wrestling, and I asked him why. He said he had teammates that were intentionally trying to injure him and put him out permanently. He had the guy grab his leg and basically try to break his leg or blow his knee out, and he kind of called the guy out, and the guy acknowledged that, I wanted to hurt you. I don't want you on the team.
That sucks. That's brutal.
So he ended up walking away from it, which is really sad.
Yeah.
But that's, and a trans man, that's obviously, this has all affected him as well. But the reason we're focused on trans women is obviously this is where the, the biggest part of the argument comes in, and what's been used politically to, motivate things.
Yeah.
So in addition to more studies, I think we need, for me, in order to feel this is a fair, there needs to be rules for time on hormones and what those levels can be.
Right.
So you need, like, one of the most important aspects is the source of androgens either needs to be removed, like I had done, or blocked. And there are medications you can take that will reduce the levels. But then they need to be below a certain threshold. And that's been studied, and there's a little bit of debate exactly how low that needs to be. And, but we need rules on that, and that needs to be monitored and checked. And, if there is a trans woman that wants to compete, how long has she been on hormones, where her level's been at, and that's still debatable. I would say it's probably somewhere between 1 and 2 years, minimum. And then, with levels probably somewhat below a typical female's levels, to balance that out. That's what the studies seem to show, and that's what we've kind of seen. So from everything I've seen, that's where my recommendation would be.
Okay.
But there's other arguments to consider when we're talking about fairness and everything too. There's an argument to be made, and a lot of people use this, that sports are always inherently unfair and always will be because of genetics. So like the best athletes in any sport are going to have genetic advantages, just like Michael Phelps did in swimming. Right. And I think the best example I can think of is Icelandic strongmen. So Iceland, is a small island, a small country that has a population of 300 and some thousand. That's the size of a small city here in the US. Very, very small population. Just from that small country, there have been 19 World's Strongest Men title winners. And World's Strongest Man started in the late 70s. So we're talking out of this tiny little population that's the size of a small city in the US, they've done extremely well in strongman. So that shows you, like, in that sport, how much their genetics have contributed to their success. So that's, I'm not saying that argument, like, I 100% agree with it, but there's clearly genetics play a role in athletics, and, the best champions in every sport, the world record holders, don't have poor genetics. I'm not going to say they're the biggest genetic freaks, because sometimes the people that are most like have the best genetics don't work hard and, you know, don't have the mindset.
Right.
But I don't think there's any arguing that genetics play a significant role in athletic success. And so, yeah, you can make the argument that there's no such thing as fair sport because no one has the same genetics. Everybody's genetics are different.
Right.
So it's an argument that can be made. I'm not saying I 100% agree with that, but that it can be made. And then it's just, let's focus a little bit. Like I said, we're going to try to look at this from all aspects and present both sides of the case. So the evidence for and against trans women being able to compete fairly, I would say the strongest evidence for is that, so in the Olympics, you know, trans women been able to compete since 2004. Not only has there been no Olympic champions, no Olympic world record set, no, you know, there have been no Olympic medals of any kind. There's only been, I believe Laurel Hubbard is still the only open trans woman to even compete in the Olympics. And she, as we already covered, she didn't place. So we're talking over a 20-year period. If trans women had such a huge advantage, how come there hasn't been one single one in over 2 decades that has even been able to medal at the Olympics? You know, so that lends to, it's not as easy as you think. And like, it's not as simple as some guy jumping into women's sports and crushing everybody. That's not what's going on.
I do think maybe though, there's probably a lot less trans women that actually enter into competition than would like to, right?
Yeah, the number of trans athletes is low, but there are a number. I do know of a number of trans athletes, including a Canadian cyclist a while back, that tried to make the Olympic team and failed.
Oh, really?
There's been a number of trans girls that have tried to make Olympic teams from different countries and have not been able to do it, didn't even make the team.
It'd be interesting to see, like, I know probably people aren't like statting these things, but like if you saw the stats on that, like how many people actually tried, didn't make it versus how many people like
it might be
overall tried.
Yeah. The number certainly isn't high.
Right.
But again, if it's like, you know, because we have in some sports, there are high school boys that are better than the top women in the world. And so like if there's such a, you know, huge advantage in some sports, like I said, these are going to be sports that are probably more speed and strength related. You would expect more success than what the trans women have had.
Right.
And not only in the Olympics, but in every single sport in the entire world. And this is another thing that media and social media greatly misportrays. No trans woman has ever broken a legitimate world record. There's no trans woman in any sport in the entire world that was better than the best women. And none of them are even close, to be honest. If you Google search the internet, you'll find some trans women that have won Masters World, like older age division championships. There was a power lifter that, you know, claimed to won a world championship. It was actually a small organization with only a couple people. Right. And she was nowhere close to the actual like world record holders in that division. So there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of exaggeration. But yeah, at this point, there's no trans woman in any sport anywhere in the entire world that is anywhere close to the best women. So that's more, you know, saying, well, gosh, if it's so unfair, how come no one's been able to do this? And then I would say the strongest evidence against it being fair for trans women is that we have a couple examples, really only 2 I can think of. And that would be Leah Thomas and CC Telfer. And I'm not saying I agree with this line of thinking, but the fact that, so these 2 girls are the only 2 that won NCAA championships. CC Telfer won the 400-meter hurdles in Division II, and Leah Thomas, as most people will be, she's probably one of the most familiar names. Leah won event in swimming, in women's swimming. She won an NCAA title, and I'm forgetting which event it was. But she competed in multiple events. One event she placed dead last, and I think the other one she was 5th, and then she won one. So even though she won a single event, she wasn't dominant by any means. But the argument I would say that is not only that they had success, but they had more success after. So both of these athletes started out in college competing on the men's team, then transitioned and finished their last couple of years on the women's team. Now, the argument against would be that they had significantly more success competing on the women's teams than they did as men. And I would say that is like, if you're going to point to anything, that is the statistics that would be like, okay, well, they were significantly better as women than they were as men.
Right.
It looked on, and we can't say for sure because it was their last couple years, and maybe they would have progressed a lot, on the men's teams. And gotten a lot better the last couple of years, but it did not look like either of them had a legitimate shot at winning a national title competing as men, and then both of them were able to do that as women.
Right.
And then again, to be fair, like I said, Leah won one event, took dead last in another, and fifth in another.
And you don't really hear about that either. In the
No, they
media,
don't.
right?
No,
Like
they don't talk about that. They would give you the impression that she came in and crushed everybody. And with Cece, it's the same thing. She won a Division II, national title in the 400 meter, but that was not an event she dominated all year. She lost that event multiple times. That was like her best race and her best time, and she just peaked at the right time. But she had been beaten many times during the season by other girls in that same event. And had she been in Division I, her time would have placed her 7th. So again, she wasn't anywhere close to the best girls just in college.
Yeah.
But I would say that's the strongest argument that, it might be unfair, is that these two girls out of everybody, but were able to achieve significantly more success competing in the, women's division. Like I said, there's arguments to be made. I just don't think this isn't a simple, right, wrong, fair, not fair. Like, as we just went through, there's so many different scenarios. I really think it has to be handled on, my opinion, and this is my opinion only, is that it should be handled on a case-by-case basis. And the thing is, currently there's such a small number of athletes. That's not something that would be difficult to do. Like I said, in the NCAA, out of over 500,000 athletes, we have 10 trans girls competing. Yeah. You could look at every one of them and then, and I don't know how you do this. Do we look at percentiles? Do we look at, are they, if a female athlete comes in and maybe she's so far outside of the norm that, there's some line you draw, and
it's so hard to measure too, though, right? Because then if you're just really good, you just get punished.
That good of an athlete. Now you're punishing someone who's just a super good athlete.
You kind of have to just play it safe. Yeah, it's not really, I don't think that's a great measuring stick.
No, so I think, like I said, my opinion would be the fairest way to do it is, there are strict rules for length of time on hormones, where your levels are at. And then maybe we need to look at some rules too, age of transition. Like I said, I don't see any problem at all with a girl who transitioned prior to, having a male puberty. I think, yes, across the board, they should be allowed to compete because they never got those genetic advantages. And it's something we haven't talked about at all either. That's also important is a lot of the arguments that are being thrown out there. Men have higher red blood cell counts. They have, greater disproportionate amount of muscle mass to body fat, the greater bone density, which bone density is one of the dumbest arguments ever. Like, that has so little to do with athletics. You never ever turn on ESPN and hear someone talking about a great athlete and being, oh my God, this guy's got the best bone mass ever.
Do they ever measure that? Is that something people ever?
Not for, it was something, honestly, interestingly, that was an argument that was also used back in the day to keep sports segregated because people from African descent have a naturally higher bone mass. And so that was one of the arguments. Oh, there's certain genetic advantages. The same kind of arguments were used to keep sports segregated. Bone mass was one of them, but certain genetic advantages saying it's not fair. And so, it's interesting that those same arguments, we've heard these before. But all those things change. Like, so when you suppress all the androgens and replace it with estrogen, and in my case also progesterone, your red blood cell count drops. Your bone mass takes longer, but it does decrease over time and will eventually normalize. And then I'm thinking, what are some of the other common arguments? There's a bunch. I know them very well. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, like, a lot of these advantages that men enjoy over women due to androgens disappear over time.
Right. You were telling me actually before we started here about the contraction of the muscle.
Yeah. So androgens do have, PEDs,
that was something I didn't know at all before.
That's something that's not very well known. But PEDs do have a neurological effect as well. And that's why when people start a steroid cycle, they'll have this big jump in strength, typically a couple weeks after starting. And part of that is the neurological drive. It allows, and honestly, I don't know the exact mechanism, and I don't know if I haven't dug into enough to see if anyone knows exactly what's going on, but there is a neurological aspect where your nervous system is able to recruit those muscles better and allow them to lift more weight. So that's why you'll typically see, like I said, 2-3 weeks or 4 weeks after someone starts a cycle, their strength will jump up significantly. Very noticeably. I mean, significantly is, I guess, kind of a subjective term. It's not like you're going to gain 100 pounds on your bench press.
Right.
But all of a sudden, there's a noticeable bump. Like all your lifts are up 10, 20 pounds, sometimes a little more. And that part of that is the neurological effect. So that's another thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely, the thing is the single biggest factor separating male and female athletes is the androgens. And that's like, we see that with steroids. You just give people more, and I hate to call them male and female hormones because that's really kind of a misnomer. Both men and women both produce testosterone and estrogen. It's just in varying levels. But yeah, add more androgens in, your performance gets better. And it does a really good job of nutrient partitioning where you're able to carry a lot more muscle fat or muscle mass at a lower body fat. That's like probably the things that steroids do best. And then, strength and speed are significantly increased, and not as much as some people think. Typically, you see a 10 to 15% increase in strength. Steroids do not take an average Joe and make them a world champion. What it does is it takes a high-level athlete and then allows them to become uber elite, and and the same thing. And it's going to increase anyone's performance, but they do not take an average person and make them a champion. It's like I said, like typically strength-wise, you're talking 10 to 15%. A little more with some people, but you don't take somebody who benches 100 pounds and turn them into a 500-pound bencher. That doesn't happen. But I guess we're kind of getting off on a tangent.
Well, so the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, I think you mentioned the harm that's kind of coming away by questioning women's genders overall. You want to talk to that a bit?
Well, yeah. So that's another important aspect a lot of people aren't talking about, is that who's probably going to be harmed by this the most outside of trans people is women. We're already seeing a number of laws proposed doing gender checks, which often involve basically genitalia. So do we really want people checking young high school girls' genitals to ensure they're female?
That's so
under
weird.
The guise of keeping trans athletes out of sports.
Under the guise of keeping women safe, I think.
You're saying let's look at a bunch of young girls' genitals. That's frightening. And then and the other thing is that we're already seeing where any girl who doesn't appear stereotypically feminine, if she's, has short hair, happens to be really good. This happened in out west here in the United States. This happened with a softball player. One of the girls, who happens to be the daughter of a president of a conservative organization, that went to court over this to help change the laws and testified that. I believe it was in court. It was definitely in front of somebody that was looking at changing rules. And, but she testified that on her softball team, that they played against a trans girl and how crushed she was and how everybody on her team, how affected they were by this. And that this was all due to the other team having this trans girl on their team. The reality is, turned out there never was a trans girl.
Oh, really?
And the coach, when they talked to the coach of the opposing team, they're like, no, they thought she was trans because she was really good and she had short hair. Like, no, it was just another girl. But this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Is that, so any girl who doesn't fit these stereotypically feminine ideals is going to have her gender questioned.
Right.
We're already seeing this. We're already seeing scary laws like the genital checks and things like that are being proposed under the guise of keeping trans athletes out, that are going to threaten women.
And trying to keep women safe. And I think it's weird because I think I've heard this argument a few times too, is like, they're generally people that didn't care much about women's sports before. So it seems like kind of like a weird thing to suddenly really care about how it affects women. And I think that just tells you like, that's not what the actual point of it is, right? Like, I think if you see someone like, like maybe like me or like another like female athlete that's raising concerns, like they care about women's sports. That's what it's behind. Like the emotion is behind. But when you see like a lot of these people in politics and whatever, just like doing that, you're like, I don't get it. You don't actually care. Like, what do you care
this was
about?
not a big deal. Like, and it's funny because like if you ask these people to name their top 5 female athletes, they probably can't even do that. They don't even know. They don't even follow these sports.
Right.
And but yeah, it's like, and I personally know because of all this stuff and because of everything that's happened with the media and stuff surrounding trans people, I have a couple female friends who are one bodybuilder in particular who got cussed out in a women's restroom because somebody thought she was trans.
Right.
She's big and muscular, and she didn't even know what was going on. Like she said some lady started screaming at her in the bathroom, "What's your gender?" And she said she was so confused by the whole interaction, she didn't really understand what was going on. And then the woman yelled at her for a bit and then stomped out. And then she kind of out loud was like, "What is going on?" And then another woman explained to her, she's like, "I think she thinks you're trans." And then she joked that, well, I guess that all the lifting is working then, you know.
Yeah.
And but yeah, again, just another woman who was big and muscular, and who knows, it could have been a situation where if this woman had called the police, or depending where you're located, you know, she could have. And there's times where like girls have gotten beaten up in female restrooms because somebody thought they were trans. And so this poses a lot of risks to all women. Because of stuff. So basically this, the gender check stuff has been proposed in other places. And this could have a lot of backlash and a lot of serious consequences for women in general, under the guise of, trying to keep trans women out of sports.
And I think like for any kind of children, like there shouldn't be any sort of gender checking or anything like that.
No,
for adults,
so
sure, take my blood, whatever, right? But why are you looking at people's genitals?
Yeah,
like it's just such an odd thing. I can't like, and like even you didn't even mention like intersex, but different people have different looking genitals too, right? Like not everybody's going to conform into what people think.
Yeah. What about a woman who's born with a unusually large clitoris?
Sure. Yeah. So suddenly, are you not allowed to compete? Are you considered trans? Are you considered? Like what do people like that think? Like there are differences in our bodies, right? And that's just
there's a lot of
part
variation.
of it.
Well, that's the thing, and this is. And if people can let us know, like the listeners can let us know if they want us to go into this in future episodes. But one I'd really like to do is on intersex conditions.
Right.
They're a lot more common than people think, and they have a long history of being intertwined with women's sports. Ever since women were allowed to compete in the Olympics, intersex women with intersex conditions have been good athletes and have often been, among the champions and stuff. So that's another thing that becomes a lot more complicated. And we're seeing, rules against, there's 2 boxers right now currently that there's a lot of controversy around, and the one won gold at the last Olympics. And they're being accused of, and this hasn't been confirmed, but they're being accused of having intersex conditions. Well, they're also accused of being trans. And then they were able to disprove that. They're not trans. But now they're still being rumored that they have an intersex condition. And so that's another thing. And then there was Caster Semenya, who was a gold medal winner in the 800 meters, I believe in Rio. And but she was another one that had competed as a woman her entire life, but then after winning gold, her gender was questioned. She had to take genetic tests and found out she did in fact have an intersex condition. But again, this is a person that was born that way. And then they were trying to make her, at one point they made her suppress her natural testosterone levels because they were a little bit higher.
Right.
And but that's what her body is. So what are you going to do? You're going to say someone, for sports where height's an advantage, you're going to say someone above a certain height that they have an unfair advantage so they can't play. So like, it's such a nebulous thing. And like, how do you draw those lines?
I know, and it's hard. It's really hard. It's hard too because part of me is like, yeah, totally, and then the other part of me is like, but on average, when you're born male, you do have, you are taller, you are bigger, you do have some advantages that are across the board in a general population.
Like, on average,
right?
Well, that's the thing.
That's all you can use as an average.
We all know a girl who's,
of course,
6'4", broad-shouldered and super strong.
Totally, right? Yeah.
And then we know a guy who's 5 foot tall and super petite.
Yeah, but I think all I'm saying is like, if you take an average, then that is like seems more fair because like, yes, on average, a male will be able to outperform a female.
Right.
Not always.
Yeah, not always, depending on the task. But if we're talking about some speed and strength related stuff, more males are going to enjoy it.
Yeah, and again, that's comparing men versus trans women is not the same thing, obviously, but it's like, So.
And that's one of the biggest problems. And we've said this a couple times, but I want to reiterate because it's such an important point. This argument is all you're seeing on I shouldn't say all, but the vast majority of what you're seeing on the internet is that biological male versus females. And that's how this is being framed. That's how this is being proposed. And again, it's to strike fear. It's to rile people up. There's an agenda behind this. This is part of politics. And this is a tactic that politicians have used for many, many years. And this was done with segregation. This was done with gay marriage was the most recent one. And then people stopped caring about gay marriage.
Right.
So now it's trans people. That's the political tool that's being used to motivate their voter base. Yeah. And you can't separate that from what's going on if we're going to talk about trans athletes, because that is a big driving force behind all of this.
For sure.
Yeah. So like I said, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap things up?
I think that's everything, right? I think we just, something that we both wanted to say was just that we hope, if you come at this with holding one opinion or the other, that you'll listen to both sides or consider some of each side and just think about it from the other perspective. That's what we kind of want to inspire in people, just to think, right?
Yeah. And do your own research. And we presented a lot of stuff today. And like I said, obviously I have a very personal bias. I do try to look at this from as neutral perspective as possible. And there's a reason why I've chosen not to compete myself. Like if I was someone who, was just like, firmly stood on the one side, I could have made that choice to compete as a trans woman. And, but I obviously have chose not to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I do have a bias and I'm sure that comes through
and so do
in
I.
all this.
Like, right? Yeah.
And so do your own research. Do your own searches, figure your things out for yourself, but try to look at it from both perspectives, regardless which side of the argument you're on, and try to look for the truth. Look at the facts, look at everything that's out there. Like I said, there's some very compelling things. And like I said, it's if you're just looking at social media and the news, I recommend that no one even watch the news anymore. There's no such thing as news. It's all just like agenda driven.
It really is.
Information. It's very hard to find neutral sources these days. You have to do your own research.
If I can add in one quick point about the news, I'm a firefighter, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, and I've been to calls where I've been on the call and seen what's happened, and we come back to the station and you see it on the news and there's a completely different story talking about said call. So, just use your discretion, your own discernment about what you hear. And that's why we're trying to give a decently accurate version of what we think, the best of our research, and just cause you to think a little bit and just recognize there are two sides of this, and both sides have some points, right? Both sides make sense. And I know, for me, when you first brought this topic up to me, I think years ago, we started talking about this, and I had completely no idea any of those things. I heard all of the stories that were blown up, and I thought that, and I didn't think that. I didn't have any neutral opinions at the time, right? I felt strongly maybe towards the one side, and I've really shifted that because I took time to hear that and understand that and recognize there's a lot of validity on the other side, and I was being
you were someone who was very against
and I would say
initially.
I couldn't. It's not even I was against. I just couldn't see how it would be fair. And again, that is coming from my experience of growing up in completely male-dominated things and interpreting trans women as just men with a different identity at the time, right? Or just not. I shouldn't say that. That's kind of. But knowing you, and you were trans when we first met, you've always been trans, but you're out as trans, but you hadn't started transitioning physically. Yeah. So to me, I was like, okay, there's a trans person who identifies this way but isn't fully transitioned. So that was sort of my experience with trans people.
I'm probably the worst example. I'm an extreme outlier, transitioned much later in life. I'm still my body, and to be fair, my body's still changing. The hormone, I haven't experienced the full effects of transition yet. I'm curious myself to see how much more my performance suffers over the next if a couple of years from now, if it's still decreased a bunch more.
I'm really interested to see. And we're interested to see too. We're gonna, whenever Janae's got an injured knee, but whenever she's better, we're gonna roll together and jiu-jitsu and see what the strength difference is. We genuinely want to know, right? I think both of us have genuine curiosities. We're not trying to be oh, it should be this way or it shouldn't be this way.
Yeah. What's the reality?
Yeah. What's the reality,
I mean, obviously, and that's one of the reasons we started this podcast, trying to be authentic, honest, open, vulnerable.
Exactly.
And then in things like this, let's try to look at it from all perspectives. Like I said, we can't take our bias out of it, and I'm sure that comes through.
Right.
But yeah, please do your own research. our main purpose is to make people think and present our perspective. And we hope you found this valuable. And let us know if you want, because I would love to talk about intersex conditions and intersex athletes, how, all this ties into politics a lot more, because that's a huge thing. And there's so many laws right now trying to limit, trans people's access to healthcare and other human rights. And this is being used to drive all of that. So if those are topics that, our listeners and our viewers would like to see us talk about, we'd be happy to do that. So
yeah,
please
absolutely.
let us know.
We always welcome all the suggestions in the comments. I think that's a great resource. So yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in today. We appreciate it. If you like what we're doing, do all the like, subscribe, and all that stuff. And thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you again in the future.
Yeah. See you next time.